Handwriting seems a rather old-fashioned way to communicate and express yourself. The question is, why does handwriting still persist? Why do people still use a manual technique that is thousands of years old, when there's less time-consuming technologies of print and digital reproduction of texts available? The physical act of writing something by hand seems to be more meaningful than the simple act of fixing characters and visual signs to a mobile surface. The special significance and power of handwriting becomes evident in the context of religious practices. When written words are perceived as a divine revelation or in relation to an otherworldly reality, the writing, the medium through which the believer experiences transcendence, takes on transcendental properties itself. If this is the case, how then do scribes of religious texts bridge the gap between traditional ways and new forms of reproduction of the written word? And how do new technologies impact the production and use of artifacts in a contemporary religious sphere? Here to talk about these questions are three experts from the respective fields of Islamic, Japanese, and Jewish studies who are carrying out their research at Hamburg University's Cluster of Excellence, Understanding Written Artifacts. Each of them will discuss why handwriting is still crucial in modern religious practices and what difference it makes whether an artifact is handwritten or mechanically produced.
Printing is most efficient when it is used to distribute text or image to a large audience. If you only need to preserve information once or twice, writing by hand easily is one of the more practical choices. What is more, a manuscript is much closer connected to its scribe than a printed book is to the author of the text or even the printer who produced it. In the Islamic world, a type of manuscript evolved that was shaped by these two implications. They were intended only for a very small readership, and it was very important who exactly wrote them. The Arabic term for such a manuscript is ijaza, which means permission or certificate. It was granted by a teacher to their student to certify that the latter had acquired certain knowledge, for example in a special field of learning or several fields of learning, but sometimes also that the student had listened to a reading of a certain important treatise or that they had memorized a famous poem. The ijaza is proof then that this person is authorized to pass on what they have learned to others. We have evidence of this kind of practice from centuries ago. For example, when an important book, in manuscript form of course, was read aloud and discussed in a session with a small audience, a scribe could make a note in the very same manuscript about who had participated in this reading session. Later, with the help of these notes, an ijaza could be written for those who had heard the entire book. And sometimes this too could be in the form of a small note written into the margin of the manuscript itself. But an ijaza could also come in the form of an entire book, albeit a very small one. Some of these were made at least until the early 20th century. They contain a detailed report of the subject or subjects which the student had studied, and a long list of their teachers and the teachers' teachers and so on, typically going back to a famous scholar from history or a religious authority. As the ijaza describes the individual learning journey of a student, if you will, it would make little sense to have it printed. But practicality is only one reason why many of them continue to be produced by hand. These certificates reflect the traditional way of learning in the Islamic world, and here knowledge, including religious or spiritual knowledge, came from prominent scholars in history or religious authorities, including the Prophet Muhammad. And this knowledge was passed on orally to their students, the students' students, and so on. The ijaza then could be proof that a person is part of this chain of transmission, and the teacher's handwriting for their student underlines their relationship. The importance of personal connections is evident also in some manuscripts that are in fact copies of older ijazas, probably because it was important to someone at a certain point in time to preserve also older stages of the transmission of knowledge. While printed ijaza forms that could be filled in came up at some point, such a printed replacement would not convey the same personal connection. Modern scholars like Francis Robinson have argued that this is one of the main reasons for the very late adoption of print in the Islamic world, because compared to a manuscript, a print in general did not come with the same personal authority with regard to the correctness of the content, even if the content was identical. The close relationship between teacher and student remains important even until today, and frankly, not only in the Islamic world. And in Ijaza, the teacher's handwriting is proof, handmade proof if you will, that a student is part of a living tradition of learning.
In East Asia, by way of contrast, technologies such as woodblock printing had been in use on a large scale at least since the 7th century, but printing never supplanted manuscript production. This observation holds true especially in religious contexts. Copying a sacred text by hand was the primary instrument for gaining spiritual merit. Writing, say, an excerpt of a sutra by one's own hand, or have somebody else write for one's benefit, those types of manuscript production were, and are, hugely popular. The manuscript artifacts that are the results of such practices typically reproduce canonical formulae, passages, and texts, and as such, they are strictly formalized in layout and content. In a way, then, we have the surprising phenomenon of one and the same text being mass-produced in handwriting, by different scribes at different times and in different settings. I'd like to introduce you to a fascinating example from Japan, where pilgrimages to religious sites, both Shinto and Buddhist, have been popular for hundreds of years. Even today, we may observe the following scene. A pilgrim visits a monastery, a temple or a shrine, makes their tour through the compound, pays their obeisance to the statues and icons, and then presents a shuinto, or vermilion seal book, that is a small Leporello-formed book such as the one I have in my hand here. Presents such a shuinto to the priest along with a few coins. The priest wets the brush and inscribes a few characters in different sizes. The date of the visit, the institution's name and epithet, the main object of veneration, and possibly other noteworthy details appear on the page in standardized layout. And then finalizes her or his production by affixing vermilion-colored seals and stamps to the paper. This scene is repeated with the next pilgrim, and the next, and the next, and so on, each time resulting in a complex written artifact that is the same, yet different. In busy locations with numerous pilgrims and tourists, the same text in identical layout is reproduced hundreds of times per day, and yet the artifact the pilgrims and tourists take with them, that is the book containing these pieces, is a valued and highly personalized object. Religious institutions point out that shuinto are by no means mere souvenirs, that they are essentially different from commemorative stamps and that they should be treated with respect. Traditionally, they are to be placed on the household altar, next to the tablets commemorating the family ancestors. Recently, however, Japan has experienced a shuinto boom, a vermilion seal book boom, not so much as documents of religious practice, but as tourist memorabilia. In order to cater to increasing demands, some places no longer offer handwritten shuin, but have opted for carved printing blocks made of rubber. These are beautifully cut with the standard calligraphy of the place, but they are not manuscript, and since they apparently fail to comply to more traditionalist expectations, they are frowned upon by more conservative-minded institutions. When visiting a shrine in the hills north of Kyoto, I brought with me a shuinto that had just been stamped at one of the city's most prestigious Buddhist temples. The shrine official who inscribed their shuin glanced at the print on the opposite page and made a disapproving sound, and he said, "I can't believe how far down they've come over there." Mass-produced shuinto may be, they clearly differ from mere prints and retain the significance of an original manuscript.
Moving from the sphere of personal devotion to the public religious practices, the Jewish tradition provides one of the most instructive examples of the importance of handwriting. Communal service in the synagogue can be carried out exclusively from a handwritten Torah scroll. The Torah scroll comprises the 5 books of Moses. Each is the holiest of the Jewish sacred objects, and it has been always produced manually in accordance with strict religious rules. These rules regulated each aspect of producing the Torah, from preparation of the parchment and ink to implementation of writing. Any deviation from these rules would render the scroll invalid for religious use. The modern Torah scrolls, therefore, must be produced in accordance with the religious prescriptions, necessarily manually. This process can take about 1 year of scribal work. As a result, the Torah scrolls produced in our days show little differences from their ancient predecessors. Same as the oldest extant examples, the contemporary scrolls retain the traditional 3-column layout of a parchment sheet, the fixed number of lines per column, and the special line arrangements for certain text passages. Individual letters, their crowns, involutions, and special shapes are also the product of an ancient tradition. These are distinctive features of the Torah scrolls and are different from the way of writing in other Jewish books. The uniformity of the scroll's content and appearance that the Jews passed through ages was aimed at retaining the same way as the first Torah scroll was written by Moses. This kind of persistence to prevent any changes not only in the biblical text itself, but also in its material manifestations, was one of the main reasons for Jewish rejection of the form of codex for the Torah used in the public context. When at the beginning of the Common Era, the codex replaced scrolls in the surrounding cultures, the Jews gradually adopted the codex as the main form to produce books, but not for the Torah scroll. Liturgical readings of the Torah were and still are strictly forbidden to be carried out from the codex. The adherence to the old ways, which is the key concept of Jewish religious practices, thus did not leave any room for the new technologies to enter the religious sphere, either back then or now. Also, other solutions for speeding up the process of production and reducing its price, such as replacing the scribe by a robot, are not regarded as a possibility by most Jewish religious authorities. Although the robot can reproduce the scroll with traditional ink on traditional parchment and can follow all halachic prescriptions more precisely than a human scribe, the work of the robot lacks intention and spiritual properties. These properties are primary for copying the Torah and are integral to its validity. Unlike Japanese shuincho, the Torah scroll then is impersonalized object, but the individual human role of the scribe is essential for establishing the link between God and the copied scroll, and is part and parcel of its transcendental qualities. The rare rabbis who are more positive about mechanical solutions insist, therefore, that any references to God would still be inserted into the text manually by a scribe. It seems thus that the Torah scroll has been always and will remain handwritten.